Hi, this is Gold Cord, The Story of a Fellowship by Amy Carmichael, Chapter 13. So many questions lie ahead concerning the work, and a great comforting came this morning in the chapter in Job 28 about the way of wisdom and the place thereof, verse 23. It tells how God finds the way for the wind and the water and the lightning. And it came with a blessed power what those ways are. The way for the wind is the region of the greatest emptiness. The way for the water is to the place of the lowest depth. The way for the lightning, as science proves, is along the line of the greatest weakness. If any man lack, there is God's condition for his inflow of the spiritual understanding. Praise be to his name. I, Lilias Trotter, from a private diary. Again, chapter 13. What are you going to do with them? But fears came up perpetually and danced before our eyes like wearisome, mischievous goblins. We found that we could only go on if we if we leaned all our weight on the promises. Yet there was always a sense, even then, that something good lay ahead, and that we were being shaped for that good thing, though we did not know what it was. Their Redeemer would not waste the children. If only they had the sovereign quality of truth, somehow the way would open. So we tried to bring them up to be truthful and faithful, ready for any sort of hard work, not slackers. And though, when we could not answer the frequent, "And what are you going to do with them?" with a clear-cut plan, and must have appeared unpractical and foolish, we were not cast down. Thou knowest, Lord. Thou hast not shown us yet, but thou knowest, we used to say to him, and found it comforting. Only teach us how to train them in honesty and thoroughness, in detachment from the spirit of the world, and in a pure indifference to all its tinsel allurements. Give us some, give us some to help us who will understand about the gold and silver and precious stones. Let us not be disappointed of our hope. And he answered with a word of strong consolation, for he himself knew what he would do. One day a group of castmen gathered on our veranda. They besought us to heal a very sick man whom they had brought in a cart from Holytown, 3 miles away. They could not be persuaded to take him to the nearest hospital, which was a day's journey distant by cart. The shaky cart would be too much for him. He had almost died on the way to us. And one of the relatives, frantic and in tears, flung himself at our feet and stretched full length on the ground, cried imploringly, "Oh, be persuaded! A child, his wife, beseeches you." And as we talked, in a house in Holytown, a girl sat waiting. He was her husband. If he died, the people would say that a snake had proceeded from her and devoured his life. She would be treated as though this were true. She had seen other children treated so. She had heard the jeers and scoldings, seen the averted faces, for it is unlucky to meet a widow. She knew all about the long penance of semi-starvation, had seen many a girl slowly harden under the strain of daily revilings. How could she bear it? She cried aloud to heaven in her fear, but heaven did not seem to hear. She vowed vows. She laid all she had to offer before the family God. She fell at his feet and besought him to have mercy. And in the room where the sick man lay, people came and went and did not heed her. Nobody heeded her. She cried herself sick, but nobody knew. At last a gleam of hope had lighted her sorrowful heart. They were going to take her Lord to the white people. Were not his three pulses, called wind, fire, and water, all talking together, indicating approaching convulsions? Not only powdered silver and gold, but tiger's claw, elephant's tooth, and stag's horn had been ground up in combination with the usual mixture of herbs and arsenic and administered in great and nauseous doses, but in vain. All having failed and death being imminent, it was time to turn to the white people. That they were not doctors did not matter. They ought to know what to do. Had not white people many wise books? Anyhow, it was the last hope, and so four anxious relatives carefully hoisted the sick man into the cart and set forth. But to the grief of the white people, who knew the long misery that threatened the girl, of whom the men spoke now and suddenly remembered her existence, and hoping that the thought of her would move their hearts, they could only say, "We can do nothing. But thou, O Lord, art a God full of compassion. Thou knowest to the utmost what human pain can be. Wilt thou not give us a doctor to help these poor people?" We found our way to that prayer as the little procession turned and moved slowly and dejectedly down the road. And like a little white cloud that melts into the blue almost before it is clearly seen, a thought came and a hope. And the years passed, and then the little white cloud thought took shape again. About this time, people wanted a book to tell more about the children and what we had been able to discover of the temple traffic. So, in odd corners of time, Lotus Buds had to be written. It owed much to a lifelong friend of the work, Mr. Willoughby Lay of the Indian Civil Service. He read through in typescript. We had put the stories last, as of least importance. "No, put them first," he said. "Then people will be drawn to go on." So we turned the book upside down, and some did go on, and more than one who went on was led out to India. The first of these was Frances Beath, who joined us in 1910. She was indeed a godsend in those early days, for she was of the company of the willing-hearted, loving, and beloved. When a new missionary arrives, her first work is the language, and her first trial is to see so much all around her which needs her help, and to be unable to give it. Frances Beath was in the midst of this when an epidemic of smallpox complicated life, and on a day which still laughs across the years to us, a guest arrived. We did not know that she was coming, for we had done the thing that is not done. Missionaries have a code of their own about this. We had mentioned the difficulties of a visit at the time, smallpox being chief. But it is hard for anyone touring India to understand how thronged a missionary day may be. And in the middle of the morning work, the unexpected bandy trumbled up. I can see it now and feel the "what shall I do" feeling of the moment. For Mabel Wade was out of reach, busy with babies. Frances Beath was at Tamil, and I was testing and measuring milk at the end of the veranda, surrounded by a crowd of milk sellers who were in a hurry to go, with a batch of suspected smallpoxes waiting for inspection, huddled up at the other end. We had only one guest room, and it was occupied. Mercifully, the guest was one who could come to the rescue, and she piloted our adventurous visitor, who declared that she did not in the least mind smallpox, through that complicated day. It seemed most discourteous not to make time to see more of her ourselves, for that visit had cost her 18 hours of rough traveling, and yet time is a curiously difficult thing to make. You can only make it if you have it, and if you have not got it, how can you get it? We had no isolation room then, and had dug out an old tent and filled it with smallpox cases, and put a hedge of thorns around it, and hoped for the best. But no Indian fears infection, and the guard we had set had slumbered. When we returned after a short absence, we found a jovial group outside the hedge, passing a sucked sweet across to the convalescing patients, who gratefully sucked it and returned it. It was not well to be off duty. But "I think missionaries require bracing up," was the cheery remark that greeted us as we met at breakfast, very hot and limp, after some strenuous hours. "Let us sing, 'Praise my soul, the King of Heaven.' That is a hymn missionaries ought to sing often. It is so bracing." And we felt too thoroughly rebuked to say that we very often did sing it. But our visitor was brave. The journey across country in a bullock cart had presented serious possibilities to her. When we saw her off, she showed us a long hat pin. "If the carter gives me any trouble, I have this," she said significantly. And as the meek old carter, who would not have thought of giving trouble to a cockroach, received her admonitions, translated carefully by us, the humor of that hatpin piled up suddenly on top of the humors of the whole day. The next moment we collapsed in helpless laughter. Is it not a mercy that missionaries can laugh?